Okay, on this week's edition of Revved Up Reflections, I don't really have a story here, just a little information on included valve angle, or basically the angle of the way the valves are splayed out in the head. On earlier models like, well, let me go back here. What included valve angle is, it's the angle of the valve in here. So that's measured in degrees from 90 degrees. So whatever it is to this valve, and whatever it is to this valve. And then the total of those two, we'll just say this is 25 degrees and 25 degrees. It's not really that. I'm just an example. So that would be an angle of 50 degrees, valve angle between those two. On earlier, like iron heads, they're actually at a 90-degree splay between those two. So the valves are actually sitting at a 45-degree angle, which isn't really great as far as intake ports go. Shovel heads are about 74 degrees. Evos are approximately 58 degrees. So they kept camping them in. Now, some more modern stuff, not on Harleys, but more modern stuff, they get it down to 26, 27 degrees, 30 degrees in that range. So what's horrible about shovel head or iron heads, angles are so great that when your rocker arm hits, it actually thrusts the valve this way. So you get some forward and backward motion. It's like it's side loading the valve. Let me show you here. So what happens is, say that's at a 45 right there, thereabouts. The rocker arm actually can push on the valve this way. So iron heads are notorious for valve guides wearing out fairly quickly. And like the intake guide on an iron head is only about that long. It's a little teeny short thing. Exhaust guides slightly longer, but it side loads them, so they wear out. So roller rocker arms are great and earlier. I mean, they're great in anything, but they're really great in something earlier, iron head or shovel head. Shovels aren't quite as bad. Iron head, you're looking at, I've seen them needing valve guides under 20,000 miles. Yeah, there's people out there that get a lot more than that, but after you've done several hundred of them, you can come up with a range of 20 to, we'll say 20 to 30,000 miles. You're looking at valve guides, and that might not be your experience, but over the long run, that's what it ended up being. Now, shovel heads are slightly better because it's not, you're at a 74-degree range between the splay, so they canted those valves in a little bit. So you don't get you still get thrusting, but not quite as bad. And shovel head guides are longer, and they do last. I've seen those guys go, 40 to 60,000 miles in that range. And anything over that, you're lucky. Now, what it does is it wears out the guides on this thrust face. So you'll take a valve and you can wiggle it around. And you can take the valve, and if you can move it back and forth while it's in there, chances are it's no good. The general rule of thumb: shovel heads, 2 thousandths intake clearance, 3 thousandths on the exhaust, and that's the spec if you're fitting new stuff. If it's old stuff, you got some room for play in there. Evos, much better valve angle. You don't have quite the wear. You don't have anywhere near the valve guide wear. I've taken apart Evos and cleaned the guides up, get the carbon out of them and clean them, and they're still well within spec. Evos, basically 1 thousandths intake, 2 thousandths on the exhaust if you're fitting new components. You're talking 2 to 4 thousandths clearance maybe, if they're worn, before you need to replace them. So these heads, what they're looking for in more modern stuff is bring valve angle in, from here pretty much to as much as you can get away with to keep the ports as straight as possible. Instead of having a port loop in, port out. So instead of having this port kind of having to loop around there and make a big turn on the floor of the port there, you want them as straight as possible. So a good cylinder head design for this would be, this coming up. What they're looking for is packaging. They're using a shared manifold or inlet manifold, intake manifold, and their carburetor's always sticking out the right side there, or induction module, whatever they're using, because that's a look thing. So packaging is kind of important. On something really good, you would want a better setup would be intakes coming straight up with downdraft carbs, or fuel injection that's pretty much straight up and down there, which, because their frame design and engine design, it just isn't feasible as far as aesthetics go. Something like a V-Rod would be a better example of a much better intake system. Granted, it's 4 valves, but V-Rod, your induction module is right up here, feeding down into there. So it's just a better setup. And what happens when you get a valve angle that's like that, with more straight shot ports, you find that you don't need to run as big an intake valve or exhaust valve in there, because you can get the head to flow better with smaller valves when you're doing that. So better port velocity, so more grunt out of something with smaller valves, and it still flows enough to support the engine whatever RPM it's running to. With these things, you're kind of limited with how much you can get the heads to flow without going giant on the intake valve and losing a lot of port velocity there, and then having to make up for it somewhere else for that. Well, as an example, like XR750, which great motor. Dick O'Brien came up with that thing, and it worked. It had smaller valve sizes. Valves were canted in a lot closer, and what was on especially an ironhead, 45 degrees, you're losing a lot of power through bad port design and rocker arm side loading the valves. So anytime you're side loading something like that, you're losing power. But for as far as Harley goes, you're stuck with what you're stuck with. Now, sometimes I've gotten heads before that are like STD heads. I guess, what was that guy's name? Lou Trachtenberg used to make, and they might still make them. I don't know. I haven't bought any in years. But they had a 3/8 inch raised intake port, or you could order them like that. And used those a long time ago. Well, not even that long time ago. I think last time I bought some was maybe 10 years ago, about that. And ordered them with the 3/8 ports, or 3/8 raised ports. But this stuff always fascinated me. So we'll go back on that. These heads, these Evo Sportster heads, they're splayed out at approximately 58 degrees. Or just think of it as like, 29 degrees and 29 degrees as far as the valves are sitting in there, basically. And this stuff isn't anything new as far as moving the valve angles, and Harley's just slow to do it. You know, things like they started doing playing with this in the 50s, as far as like Norton was doing it. Norton and several other companies were figuring out that you need to bring the valve angles in, not just for wear, but to get the ports as straight as you could get them. You know, like I said, you got this big hump in here. It's right here. So your air's kind of having to go in and down, and the floors of the ports are very important. Yeah, forgive my horrible drawing, but as an example, a shovel head, a lot of times this bottom section here, where it comes up, it's got a small bowl in there, and it comes up, and a lot of times you take it apart, and there's an exact 90-degree right here. I mean, it's flat. It runs like that and then goes down. And it's sharp curve right there on the floor of the port. Say bottom of the intake. Horrible for flow. That's actually not even correct, really. It'd be more like that right there. Where it comes in, it makes a 90-degree right there. You know, you ain't flowing nothing through that. All that flow there is going across the port and blocking off flow over here. And just by coming in here and smoothing that out right there, usually you got enough room to give it a little small radius right there instead of a sharp edge. When I say sharp edge, I mean they're like that. Yeah, sharp edge. By giving it a small radius right there, it helps. And other times I've taken and built up the floor of the port there, give it a little more hump, like give it a little hump right there with some like marine text or something like that to give it a little help. Then take you know, where this bend is right here, taking some material out right here, kind of open it up so it flows a little bit better. It does work. You know, if you got a set of shovel heads off, and run your finger up in there and feel it. If you feel it, I mean, I'm talking about earlier ones are even worse. Really sharp edge right there. So you could just give it a little radius in there. You know, take your sander on your die grinder and just give it a little radius around the floor of the port there, down to the sides. Helps out immensely. And since we're talking about shovel heads and iron heads, uh, I'll go over this on Harley was converting converting shovel heads over to no leads. They tried in '79, and you know I don't know who they talked to, but for whatever reason, their engineers decided that they were going to do it their way. Unfortunately, they did it wrong. So a lot of times, a lot of bikes in '79 that came through were sticking valves pretty quick. We're talking under 1,000 miles, and they'd stick a valve. Now, what was happening is it, up until then, up until '78, they had used Carpenter steel valve guides. But the valves were soft, which was common practice in automotive and everybody else. So you had hard guides, soft valves, soft seats was the way. No lead, it's the exact opposite. No lead, you want soft guides, hard valves, hard seats. So, you know, they learned this. So I want to say '79 and '80 maybe. And then they started changing the valve guide material to cast iron. Because they had switched to a hardened to Eaton valve, and then a Nitin valve, which is a Japanese valve, which is Nitin. You know, a lot better valve actually than the Eaton. And I don't think it was a better valve. I think it was cheaper. Because what happens with that, a lot of U.S. manufacturers, you know, you're doing shovel head valves and you're only buying, you're only buying 30,000 a year. They don't want to do that. They're used to dealing with automotive. They want to sell millions. So for them to retool and make different valves, or 30,000 units or whatever it is, just say 25,000, 20,000, whatever it was, it costs more. So, like most vendors, to keep the price of the bike down, you want to use cheapest stuff that works. So they went with knitting valves. So just remember, softer valve guides, cast iron or bronze, Ampco 45, something like that. Cast iron's cheaper than Ampco 45, bronze. Hard valves and hard valve seats. Because valve seats were actually pretty soft up until then. 70s, it started taking lead out of stuff, and the lead is what protected your valves and your valve seats. Lead was there to give it a little cushion to protect mating surfaces. Other than that, lead did nothing, just protect the top end. That's all lead did. They didn't come out and start using lead and fuel until 1937, I think it was the first year when they first started using tetraethyl lead. But that's neither here nor there. I hope you enjoyed my content. Just a little, not my normal fare for Revved Up Reflections, but just wanted to go. I was thinking about it the other day, and actually somebody had called me about a set of iron heads, Sportster heads, that was smoking on D-cell. So typically what happens, your valve guide wears, and usually just rings. Rings will smoke all the time, or especially if you're hammering on it, it'll start puffing smoke. Valves, especially if the exhaust valves leaking a little bit, got a little play in there, especially something that doesn't use valve seals. On D-cell, it creates more of a vacuum, so it sucks oil down past the guide into the exhaust port. Intake too. So another thing too, I'll just mention this, can't really go by these valve guides. On earlier stuff that doesn't use valve seals, these are cut valve seals. On earlier stuff, what you would have is, if you ever notice that the exhaust valve guide is flat across the top, that's because you actually want a small amount of oil to puddle around the valve to help cool it. On the intake side, though, it would be, you want them cut at like a 25, 30-degree angles, like just an angle on the top, because you don't want oil puddling around the intake valve, because it'll definitely suck it down there past the guide on intake stroke. So just a little information there. Anyway, that's about it. Hope everybody has a happy new year and had a good Christmas, all that stuff. And thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for commenting, all that stuff. And guys, take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.